Hi guys, welcome to LaForte Daily Demos. Today we're going to do part 2 of the motorcycle sketching from yesterday. Unfortunately my video ran out, and so the motorcycle that I began at the very end of motorcycle sketching part 1, you didn't get to see the end of it. So that was that motorcycle. That was the elevation or side view of the bike. And as I continued on, part of the video you don't get to see was the finish drawing, which was something along those lines. So today I'm just going to pick that up. I'm not going to continue this drawing. I'm just going to start all over again with the basic perspective mechanics and understanding ellipse logic and how to apply that into our two-point perspective as you begin. So let's get started. So remember, kind of going back over the mechanics yesterday, using something along the lines of an elevation view, something like this in CAD, or you could also find photos online. We noticed that there's a ratio between the front and the rear wheel of approximately a wheel and a half here. And if it's a, some bikes have maybe a shorter stance and other bikes have a longer stance, that's all fine. You don't have to be overly particular about it when it comes to your sketching, other than to define basically whether you're doing something like a chopper or a cruiser or a really low ride type of bike, or maybe a drag bike or something along those lines. Here's another one which is a little bit more clear between the front wheel. You could very clearly see another circle that is the same size as the front wheel, and a little bit more than a half a circle to the rear wheel. So knowing those proportions helps us get started, get the ball rolling. And again, we know that a circle fits into a square, so we want to use that analysis. So again, a circle and a square, this is basic geometry. So you want to do a little bit of brushing up on your fundamental geometries. And again, this is not for beginners, so take a look at more fundamental videos before you get started in this when it comes to perspective. Okay, so we're going to use those proportions. We're going to take the drawing that we did yesterday. We're not going to be overly concerned about plotting religious points and things like that for the drawing, but we do want to carry over a certain quality and attitude from this elevation or side view over into the perspective view. So that's something along those lines. In other words, the position, the stance, where the seat is, do the handlebars sit low or higher up? Is it much more of an upright type of bike? All those are definitely the things that you're going to want to capture and carry over. But with design sketching, again, feel free to make changes every time you're sketching another view. Feel free to impart your just intuition and variation and exploration as you're working. Today I'm going to sketch on marker paper. I'm going to get rid of this bond. I'm going to sketch on marker paper, and I'm going to start with the blue line sketching again. Blue line pencil. And this is a mechanical, technical pencil. I like to get started with that just because I don't have to sharpen the pencil lead all the time as much as when I'm working with the indigo pencil. But then for burning in deeper values and things, we will switch to the indigo. And I'm also going to incorporate a little bit of marker work today. So here we go. So if I get started with a perspective line like this, and this is a traditional 3/4 view of the bike. Okay, so if we start off like that and we drop in a vertical, and I start to establish where this is in perspective, something along those lines, this establishes or sets up the proportions or the direction that my perspective is going to start to unfold and develop. So first thing I want to do is I want to start to feel what is a square in perspective. And remember, the height on this vertical edge is not the same distance to this back edge. So if you're having trouble with those proportions, you got to keep going back and working on your cube proportions. So that's approximately 1 square in depth right there, and I can bisect corner to corner of that square, find the center height, carry that in the direction of the perspective line. So there's the center height of that vertical edge, and then you can take, and to keep me from spinning the paper so much on you, you can take that center line from corner of the box through the center to that intersection on the ground, and you can repeat the vertical over here, and that would be a repeat of one square, or in this case one circle in perspective. And remember, circles in perspective, I'm going to use a little model here. Circles in perspective, like this roll of tape, circles in perspective always turn into ellipses, right? So we want to bear that in mind, and what we have to do is get familiar with the fact that as the ellipse or the circle gets flatter and flatter to our eye, it turns into a flatter and flatter ellipse. Okay, and we now need to orient ourselves whether it's a horizontal plane ellipse or whether it's a vertical plane ellipse in the case of vehicle wheels and tires, motorcycle wheels and tires. So we have new rules. In the case of a vertical cylinder or a vertical plane ellipse and a horizontal cylinder, the minor axis of that ellipse, and you can actually see it very clearly in the video here in the camera, the minor axis of that ellipse points to the perpendicular vanishing point of the cylinder. So the direction of the cylinder tells us the direction of that ellipse. And that's everything when it comes to doing automobiles and wheels and tires and toys that have wheels and things like that. So if you don't get those rules down, your drawings fall apart fast and they don't make sense. They don't look right. The wheels are standing up too much, and things like that. So let's go back here to the sketch. Here's the center line axis of that box. I'm going to repeat that box one more time. So that is now a clear space between the front wheel, which is going to be here, right? That's our front ellipse. And again, the rule of this ellipse is if I've drawn it well, the minor axis of that ellipse is going to point to that vanishing point, to the opposite right vanishing point. Okay, so that's your target, that's your goal as you're sketching. At this point, I can certainly see, I could lean over on my ellipse guides and I could start to measure what kind of ellipses that look like. So here's my ellipse guides. You can see this is a 50, 40, 30, 20 degree ellipse. I don't have large ellipses at my fingertips right now, but I can start to eyeball. Does it look like a 20 degree ellipse, or does it look more like a 50 degree ellipse, right? And that can help you, especially when it comes to things like the orientation or the position, but also something like the center of the like the disc brakes and things like that, or the rims. So you can see that ellipse looks a little too open, a little too round for where this ellipse is in space. Maybe that 30 looks a little bit closer to the larger shape of the wheel. Okay, so it's a good way, even if you don't have all the ellipses for doing larger ellipses, go back to your basic small ones and use those as references. So let's go back over here to our perspective. We're building boxes, and there is two boxes, in other words, two circles in between. And again, we know that roughly our wheelbase is 1.5 circle in between. So if I bisect that square and I find the vertical axis again, that's a half. So I know that the next circle back is going to be tangent here. So again, I don't necessarily need to build the whole box, but if it helps you to build the whole box, then by all means, build the whole box, okay? So you can track your geometry and your dimensions. Oh, I made a mistake right there. I'm going to correct that. It's this edge through that center gives me the next half right there, okay? So that would help you frame and identify the center line, or the full circle. And what I meant by the center line is that tangent right there for the rear tire. Now it's a really, I think it's very, very helpful in motorcycle sketching. And again, I'm going to qualify my work here in that I am not a professional motorcycle designer. I haven't worked for any of the major motorcycle companies. in my career. It's just about understanding proportions and a system that will help you get up to speed very, very quickly in no matter what you draw. So whether you get into furniture design or appliances or vehicles, you can use a few basic perspective rules and you can be in the game pretty quickly. Now the details from there are about developing better control, knowing more of the form logic or more of the details of that particular industry or material, and so on and so forth. So, and that will improve your work as well. So when you understand that you're drawing cars and not motorcycles, that will refine your design choices. So at this point I have a pretty good relationship in terms of, it's a circle and a half, so I have a very good relationship in terms of proportions to this side view that we did before. So I have, again, another circle and a half distance between tires. So that's the starting point for my system. Now we also identified, I'm going to go back on this drawing right here and just block it in. We also identified, I'm going to do this with a red pencil, draw the box around the tire and across the top. And some of this that I'm starting right now overlaps with part 1 video. That's okay. So there's the front wheel, square. There's the tangency of the front wheel. And you notice that the fork from the center rises up and intersects that half square, or that half of the large square, half of the tire, at about the quarter mark. That's a pretty good reference point for the slope when it comes to the perspective. Okay, so again, go back to part 1 and watch that a little bit more. I go into a little bit more detail. What does that mean over here in perspective? Well, here's that same corresponding quarter square. And I'm kind of framing it in red here a little bit so that you can see it at home. And half of that, and I could bisect this to be a little bit more precise if I don't trust myself, there's half of that. So I know that the slope of the fork is going to be running up at that angle. So I've got some pretty good references. So from here, once I have those mechanics established, at this point it's a lot of free sketching and a lot of intuition. So practice, 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 and you will inherently and inevitably get better. So I'm going to try and crank out in about another 15 minutes of this video or so, basically some of the basic elements and geometries. And again, I'm going to work quickly. My minor axis here, I'm going to start to flush in the tangencies of the wheel, if it were here. And likewise, as I move back on the bike, the tangencies of the, in other words, the tangencies of the cylinder are here. And you don't have to be perfect. What you do want to do is come back around and correct or adjust. You can also line up your paper vertically like this. In other words, vertical along the cylinder direction, and see if it feels like it's leaning or twisted in any way. If it feels like it's a nice symmetrical ellipse and cylinder, then you're on the right track. And if it looks a little bit off, as it does here, then it looks a little bit, you can adjust your line work a little bit. So in other words, this line of my box is a little bit off, I think. It's pushing my cylinder. So I'm going to correct those a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and strike what I want the thickness of the front wheel to be. And again, sketch through, draw through, so that your ellipse on the other side of the tire is similar to the front side of the tire, or the edge towards us, or the plane towards us is a better way to describe it. I'm going to go ahead and take from the tangent of the tire, and I'm going to round it as it rounds underneath, and likewise I'm going to round it as it rounds up over the top. So unlike this piece of tape, this tape dispenser or roll, where it's flat across this plane, our tires roll and round, so it makes it easier for cornering, right? And that has to do with physics and all that kind of stuff. So I encourage everybody to learn more about physics and chemistry. There's a lot of things you need to learn about behaviors of light and indexes of refraction when it comes to understanding just the basic concepts and principles of glass and how light distorts and things like that. So in the rear, I'm going to pull this ellipse outward towards us a little bit. I want to make this a bit of a fatter rear tire. So I'm going to draw an ellipse over there, and I'm also going to put another one on the other side. If I feel like I want to make it a little bit wider, I can just keep pushing out. Remember to sketch all the way through. Arm mechanics, it's all from the arm, it's not from the fingertips. Okay, so one day I'll do a video on basic technique, because I think it's not covered nearly enough. So I'm going to round out the edges of that rear tire across the top. Drawing is always from the arm, from the shoulder. It's one of the first things I learned from one of my professors when I was a student. And it's also one of the hardest things to get your body and your brain to adopt. And so you just have to practice and retrain your mind in a lot of ways. Retrain your arm. And I'm going to go ahead and start to sketch in that ellipse right there. I'm going to start to sketch in the thickness of the tire, and I feel like showing the rim over on the other side ever so slightly right there. So you can start to see that emerge a little bit. Over here, I'm going to draw this like a much skinnier front tire. And now I'm going to see a lot more of the rim coming through on this other side. Remember, you have thickness of tire around here. I'm going to start to sketch in some contour lines to help you understand like the rounding as it moves around the ellipse and the cylinder. You may need to watch that on a high-res television or enlarge these videos to fill your screen so that you can really start to see some of the contouring I'm putting on the tire to help me understand the curvature of the tire. You notice that the curvature flips when you go from the center line, the minor axis, it flips and it curves underneath. And at the center line, it's going to be flat, and those curves arc the opposite direction as we go above the center line. So this is also my axle line. That's another way to think of this, is my axle line. And I could start to put a drive shaft. Well, the drive shaft on the rear, I'm going to make that on the other side so I don't have to draw it. And in this case, I decided I'm going to make it so that there's no strut arm or anything on this side. It's all on the left side drive. Now, there may be some standards. Maybe the majority of motorcycles have a left side drive, and you could get more familiar with that depending, again, on if this is your professional practice area. I'm going to start to flush in what I feel like might be the rear fender. And again, I'm going to go with like sort of a low ride cruiser style, not necessarily a chopper, but definitely a kind of a low cruiser, where the seat, in this case, you can see where the seat is aligned below the tire line. So I want to go back to my box. I want to roll down the tire here and get a little bit lower. I'm going to give myself a little perspective line here, and then I'm going to start to do the opposite direction of the perspective. This helps me establish where the center line of the bike is and where I'm going to start to place the seat. So I can get back to my perspective. I'm going to give this a little bit of a lift up in the back. This is a one-seater bike. And then I can start to look at some other elements and pieces of the bike. So a major part of the bike is the fork legs. So I'm going to start to come forward and strike the fork legs in. On the opposite of the front tire is over here. And you can eyeball and approximate where you think that's connecting to the other side. There's going to be some mechanical elements here. And as I talked about yesterday, you don't necessarily need to know every detail of the motorcycle, but you do need to know that the wheel is bolted to the forks. You know, there's a big nut, just like on your, like a lug nut kind of thing, just like on your car. So you're going to need to know some basic elements, and as you draw, and I express to my students always, over and over, drawing is about learning about what you thought you knew and what you don't know. So it helps bring your brain back around to some things that you need to come back and look at some photographs or research or study. And if you get that out of drawing, that's a really strong element to discover and learn from drawing. We're not trying to compete with AutoCAD or SolidWorks or any other 3D modeling and Alias or anything like that are incredibly precise, far more precise than we can be. We're looking for form, we're looking for position, we're looking for stance, we're looking for attitude. form language and variations like that. So sometimes, sketching is a discovery process. And that's true even if you use today's digital sketching tools. It's no difference in principle and fundamental concepts. So I'm starting to strike my forks. I know that there's a bridge between the forks. That's I don't even know the technical term for it. I'm more of a bicyclist myself. So I understand the relationship of these pieces and elements, but I don't have some of the industry language. Now, if you're a motorcycle rider, racer, then you probably do have a lot of that language in your mind, which is great because it informs your thinking when it comes to the drawing. So I know enough to give some suggestions of form and shape, and I can work off of that. That's all I'm doing here. And then I'm going to bring the fork legs up because I know that the fork legs, there's this lower cross bridge here, this kind of brace, and then there's probably another one up a little bit higher. And then that's usually where the fork legs come through that piece, and it's where the handlebars, and in this case I've got these kind of low design handlebars, so I'm going to approximate where I think those are. I'm approximating and estimating where I think the caliper is for in this case this is the rear brake, sorry, the hand brake, the front brake. And the front brake is the hand brake. Got my motorcycling and my bicycling kind of mixed up there a little bit. Alright, doesn't matter. What I do know is there's probably some pinch bolts, so I can start to give a suggestion of those things. And I'm going to go to the other side of the bike here, to the other side of the frame, and add that element there. And the handlebar on the opposite side is fading away from our eye in this view. So we're going to have to let go over here, and I can maybe just give a bare suggestion and give a little suggestion of the brake, or in this case this is the clutch handle, sorry, sticking out over there. And you don't have to draw every detail, you can't plot every single point there, so don't feel committed like you need to be able to plot every single point of a bike. A motorcycle and some other vehicles, and most vehicle design I think is, I'll say like 90% intuitive. That's just throwing out some generic number, but basically 90% intuitive and maybe 10% really knowing the mechanics. I mean, that you saw what we did here with ellipses and just setting up the perspective. So fading away from the eye is, in this case, the gas tank. Now I have my students currently working on designing an electric motorcycle, sort of getting on board with that market. So if you're doing an electric motorcycle, I don't think there's any need for a gas tank, although it may be maybe they'll become storage compartment or something like that. That would be a viable option, or maybe there's part of the battery pack up in there or something like that. But this is a classic petrol bike, say. Going back to the bike that I drew here, in here is where the pistons, the engine block is. So I'm going to give a suggestion of this and this coming down. This is like a V-twin kind of bike or something. And then I think this is part of the drivetrain, the transaxle or gearbox or something along those lines, probably. So you can start to sketch in those positional elements. So that little gearbox element might be right there. And again, the more you know about your discipline and your profession and all the language that goes along with it, the terminology, you'll understand really what you're drawing, which I'm just sort of faking it in, which is fine for my purposes. I'm giving some chrome logic in my sketching. So if you don't know chrome logic at this point, that's okay, but you might want to start to learn it. It will help add more depth. Part of chrome logic too, I'm going to be generic here in what I'm talking about, but you need to learn about light logic in general, which is core shade and all of those components. So it's way too much to cover in one video, so I'm not going to even attempt to do that. So in the rear back here, there must be some sort of suspension. I'm going to start to block that in. I'm thinking about that engine block, and it's kind of down here, and I'm just dropping in some guidelines to get my on the right track of those fins that are for air cooling, I believe, for cooling the engine heat down. And there's probably something on top that's again, it's probably like a head or something like that. My brother would probably call me up and tell me I don't know anything about motorcycles, and that's all right. Again, don't let what you don't know stop you from drawing. Feel free to fake some elements. Feel free to start to sketch in. There must be some frame in here. So I did a little bit of that yesterday, sketching in the frame and things like that. It's about a feel and how open is the frame in this case, and versus a monocoque system. Or I understand that there's some Ducatis now that the engine block is, there's no more frame. The engine block is where the head tube mounts and everything builds into it. So pretty amazing engineering that goes into that. So I'm not attempting to understand or know all those components when it comes to sketching this bike at the moment. Just giving a suggestion of the exhaust pipes coming in and some other elements perhaps, and then maybe again back here is maybe the spring. Starting to sketch all those little pieces in. And I'm going to start to sketch in, I struck a line here back into my perspective, sketching in a headlight. And again, my rule of ellipses now is that the ellipse leans in the opposite direction. If I'm standing it up too much, I just kind of get back on it and lean it. You can line up your elbow with the vanishing point. That helps get the ellipse leaning in the right direction. And I can't draw every mount and how that's actually inside there, how that's mounted in there, but I can certainly give a suggestion of its form. I'm going to go ahead and put like another couple little side lights right here off to the kind of flanking that headlight, just because I feel like it. So I'm kind of hitting the limit of what I can represent with this particular pencil, this light blue line pencil. So it's a good time to start to switch to a deeper pencil, my deeper indigo pencil, and burn a little bit more value and depth in here. So I'm going to switch. I like to have my indigo pencils sharpened in advance before I start sketching. Just saves a lot of time. I can just, when this one gets a little bit dull, I can just pick up another one and I can keep working. That's kind of a nice way to go. So you'll develop your own routines and methods and little vices and things like that. So I'm just coming in and I'm starting to think about, oh, there might be a cable or a wire that wraps up in or whatever, but I'm also thinking about the shadows. More than anything, I'm thinking about where there may be a change of material, or a change of direction, or a change of light, and that allows me to just kind of start moving through and burning in a little bit more what we like to call black point. And don't be afraid of that. This is a major challenge for young artists, young designers. They're always afraid of deeper values. So I don't know how else to get people over that hump, but I'm going to need some pegs in here. There must be a peg, and there's a brake arm in here too, probably. So I'm going to go create like a little fake of a mount and a brake arm under here. Actually, that's probably lower, so I'll just kind of fudge that in. It's a technical term, fudging. It's okay. It's part of our just staying loose and imaginative and kind of questioning the whole time what you thought you knew about not just the bike, but also I'm going to actually have to have a floating hub, I believe. There must be some sort of hub in there, even if it is only mounted on one side. So Again, the advantage of drawing is it raises all these questions. As a designer, it gives you this opportunity to go back to the photos and to go back to the CAD drawings, go back to your engineers or your design partners and figure out what it is you knew and didn't know. So I'm just starting to develop a stronger shadow here on the ground. And in this case, I'm just doing a really generic kind of vertical shadow. It's not the most flattering, but it is certainly faster than trying to get into a video where we're plotting points and raising those kind of questions about a shadow that's kicking off to the side. I'm not trying to get into that today. I'm going to switch pencils. That one's kind of burned off, so I've lost some values. And yeah, just keep working through and adding little details as you think of them. Like, oh, there's the brake disc right here, but then there must be a caliper on the back side of that. That's one thing I know about motorcycles. The caliper is almost always on the back. There may be some exceptions that I'm not aware of, but nonetheless, I can start to flush those elements in. I can certainly finish out this rear fender and start to add in some more, again, sort of chrome depth. I think I started to say earlier, if you know not just light logic, but atmospheric perspective, I think it really helps learning to fade off areas and back off of your drawing and let it just keep your imagination or the viewer's imagination alive and not too focused on every little detail. It lets the drawing breathe. And I'm going to start to put in some of these deeper fins. And again, if I have some of the details about what's mounting to what and what something is, it's okay. Every drawing emerges a little bit more information, a little bit more knowledge, and new insights. And I'm a big fan of, even when there's areas that you're not quite sure about, don't be afraid to drop in some deeper black values that feel, and in this case we're working with indigo, so what I mean by black is just deeper, darker tone values. So back in here, for example, there may be some other pieces of mechanics and material and elements, and maybe the light just doesn't get there, so you just start to render it in deeper. And that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. Makes the renderings have some more character, and more depth, and more interest. You don't have to draw every nut and every bolt and every piece of hardware. You can give a lot to the imagination. One thing I say over and over, try to break the habit of scribbling. You have to practice cross-hatching, so you're controlling your little strokes and motions with of the pencil. No scribbling. Break that habit early, and it makes your work a lot tighter, a lot stronger. Okay, we're hitting about 35 minutes. There's not much time left on this video, I believe. So I'm going to show you a couple quick tricks. Drawing's okay. I'm alright with it for the moment. I'm going to use a colorless blender. I like Copic markers, but I'm going to use a colorless blender. And you can go in on your drawing. You can start to pick up the pencil work, and you can blend it and smudge it and streak it and create some like really nice expressive lines, like on this seat. You can also express the perspective in, and you can express the tires. It'll basically smooth out and blend your Prismacolor pencil. So you can start to blend out, and I'm going to spin around. You notice I'm spinning around a lot. I know it's a little bit annoying watching at home, but you really want to work with the natural tendency, the natural direction that your hand is going to make an arc. All of us have a tendency, we have pivot points around our hands. You want to work with that direction that your hand, so I could start to create an illumination of the light here a little bit. So it's easy to overdo this kind of work with the colorless blender. So have some fun with it, but you know, I'm adding a little bit of chrome logic in some places, things like that. Have some fun with it. You can always come back with some pencils and sharpen up your work again a little bit more. But it's a nice way to create a little bit of a dynamic, free-looking illustration. So I'm just going to wrap it up there. We're at 36 minutes in this video. But that's the focal point, is how do you translate your orthographic side views into a perspective. So I hope that helps. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit if I can, and so you can see the drawing a little bit tighter, a little bit stronger, maybe a little bit more of the detail of the drawing, and hopefully that helps. Again, this is motorcycle sketching part 2. Watch the first part and this one will make a little bit more sense. Have a great day. Bye.